Welcome to the Feds, insiders bringing accountability, integrity, and reform to a broken bureaucracy. At Feds for Freedom, we value constructive dissent and healthy debate. The views and opinions shared in today's episode are those of the speaker alone and do not express the views or opinions of the U.S. government or any other employer.
Welcome back to this week's episode of The Feds. I am Stephanie Weidel. Huge news! The DOJ has settled with Feds for Freedom on our original COVID-19 vaccine mandate lawsuit. As you recall, this lawsuit was launched in the fall of 2021. An injunction of the mandate was obtained in January 2022, saving 400,000 federal workers' jobs. The case made it to the Supreme Court and then back down the judicial chain and has been in limbo since the mandate was rescinded by the Biden administration. After months of negotiating, our legal team agreed to a settlement with the DOJ that was filed August 7th, 2025. Just looking at what was given in the settlement, it is clear that it is a quiet acknowledgement, and emphasis on quiet, of wrongdoing on the part of the government. In the settlement, which includes a monetary sum, OPM, Office of Personnel Management, will issue a directive mandating the destruction of all information related to federal employees' COVID-19 vaccine status, noncompliance with the mandate, or exemption requests from personnel files. OPM also will bar all federal agencies from considering COVID-19 vaccine status, noncompliance, or exemption requests in any employment decisions, including hiring, promotions, discipline, or termination. Wow, what a win! These are issues our members have been concerned about for years. So if you want to learn more about this settlement, please check out our website at fedsforfreedom.org. Pesticides. They are balls of chemicals and toxins, which we often don't think are too harmful. But if they aren't harmful, why would the pesticide companies want immunity from lawsuits? What does House Appropriations Bill Section 453 say that makes it a pesticide liability shield? How does Section 507, addressing forever chemicals, harm American citizens? Well, these are all questions we discussed today. Today, I am joined again by one at the heart of the MAHA movement, retired physician Dr. Meryl Nass. She is the founder and president of Door to Freedom, advisor to Children's Health Defense, and a host on Children's Health Defense TV. Meryl, thank you so much for speaking with me today. It's great to see you again.
It's great to be back, Stephanie. I really enjoy your organization, and you're a very good interviewer.
Oh, thank you, Meryl. Well, I'm really looking forward to watching your new show that has just aired on Children's Health Defense TV. Do you want to, before we start, tell us a little bit about your new show?
Sure. So I've had a monthly show, which is about whatever I think is topical that month, is what we'll talk about. But we've just added a short 20 to 30-minute show on the crisis in food and agriculture. So with the crisis farmers are facing, how they're being thrown off their land and bankrupted by a whole series of about 50 different things. And yesterday we focused on sludge, on actually Section 507, which is this attempt by industry or Republicans to continue putting PFAS and other noxious chemicals that are in sewer sludge on land, including farmland, which is some brilliant idea the EPA came up with 32 years ago and has been fighting to retain and fighting to pretend that all these chemicals are fine, even though many farms in Maine have had to close. They can't farm anymore because their land is contaminated with PFAS from sewer sludge. So that's what we talked about yesterday.
Oh, what an exciting topic. Now, Section 507, that was also in the House Appropriations Bill.
Same bill.
As Section
Same bill.
Section 453.
Two horrible riders were tucked in secretly, and the subcommittee found out about them 24 hours ahead. And the subcommittee voted along strict party lines. There were more Republicans on the subcommittee to allow them to go forward. And then a week later, the full committee basically did the same thing. And these two riders are now part of the appropriations bill for the interior and environment. So it's an
Right.
environment, it's a bill through which the federal government is supposed to fund good environmental programs and fund the EPA. And yet what it's done is to actually create two horrible programs that are very bad for the environment. And it also cuts the EPA funding by 23%, which
Huh.
means that the we can get into that later, but it makes it even harder for the EPA to do the regulation that it's supposed to do. So
Right.
that defunding of the EPA will work hand in hand with Section 453, which provides a pesticide liability shield until EPA goes through a very complicated multi-year process of reviewing a pesticide. And it only has to do that every 15 years. And if its funding is cut, it probably won't even be able to do it every 15 years. So pesticide labels are frozen now. If this bill passes, pesticide labels with their warnings will be frozen with information that could be decades out of date, which is what the pesticide industry wants. So that any harms that we've learned about over the last 10 or 20 years will not be allowed to be added to the label, and people will not be allowed to get the information they need to have informed consent to use pesticides. And the term pesticide includes 50 something thousand chemicals, herbicides, insecticides, fungicides, anything that kills animals to bacteria and viruses. They're all called pesticides. They're designed to kill. These are the most toxic consumer products that we have, and the industry is trying to give them a free pass so that anyone injured, harmed, or who dies from exposure to one of these harmful products will
Mm-hmm.
not be able to sue the manufacturer, basically.
Right. It's pesticide liability shields, which is what this does by handcuffing the EPA, by not giving funding for labeling, to be able to label these toxins for what they are,
Right.
um, by
Outside of
providing.
this very complicated process. So there's a process for labeling that's specified in the pesticide regulation. So there's an old law. And until now, if the EPA or the manufacturer wanted to add to the label, they could do it. But what this law so it's a sneaky way to get what they want without saying what it is that they want. So they're saying
Mm,
no money can be spent unless you use this very complicated, very long-term process to change a label. You can't change a label. And the
hmm,
reason why they don't want the label changed is because all the cases that have been won against Roundup, which contains glyphosate, which is a herbicide, and causes non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, among other illnesses. But non-Hodgkin's lymphoma is a cancer, deadly. And so there have been now 192,000 cases brought against Bayer for glyphosate. But it used to be a Monsanto product. Monsanto sold itself to Bayer.
hmm,
Knowing it had this liability on board, Bayer bought Monsanto in 2018, took on the liability, and 2 months later, the first case was won. So there have been no non-Hodgkin's lymphoma cases until 2 months after Bayer bought the company.
hmm.
Now there's 192,000, and, Bayer has settled, over 100,000, and it still has, I don't know, maybe 60, 50,000 to go, and it's spent over $11 billion to deal with them, and it's afraid of how much liability the cost of the liability for the rest. And it had set aside before this week, it had set aside $16 billion to deal with the liability. And as of the last couple of days, it set aside another 1.7 billion. That can pay them to lobby, that can pay for their lawyers in court, and that can pay for settlements that they make with people who have gotten cancer. from using their products. So that's how it works. And they don't want to spend the whole 16. So if they can spend some portion of that to influence legislators, it's a very large war chest. And
Right.
we don't know where how much of that money might be going to politicians, but for our members of the House of Representatives to add these two riders to a bill that's supposed to protect people from poisons, but will in fact cause them to be exposed to more poisons. Um, for them to do that, they must have gotten a very lucrative or very um, positive gift of some kind. We don't know what that
Mhm.
gift is. Legally, they're not allowed to get that much money from lobbyists, but there are entities in Congress and in state legislatures that can accept unlimited funds. So
Mhm.
not the members themselves, but certain committees can.
Mm.
And then, of course, there's offshore money where we don't know what changes hands. But we do know that it happens. I mean, we've had members of Congress arrested with bundles of $100 bills in their freezer, for example. We don't know where that came from. So,
I think it's really important for the audience to understand who is actually pushing this through. It's the Republicans that are pushing this through. And Democrats, they're so tired of Republicans that they just vote against anything the Republicans stand for. So the Democrats are voting against Section 453, but yet the Republicans are barreling ahead. And so it's a very sad thing. Republicans in the past have stood for, the freedoms of the well, not necessarily all of the environmental protections, not for that, but, they stood for freedoms, and this is squelching freedom in our country. And what's so sick about it is that they still are promoting the freedom, and yet all of their votes are, showing otherwise. So there was you and I and many others. Zen Honeycutt is another one that has been very vocal about this, but we've seen this play out over the summer. And there was a campaign to call all of the congressmen, both in the subcommittee and the committee, to bang on their doors and say, please do not allow Section 453 to continue. And yet it passed. And not only
yes.
that, would you tell us, as you were watching live that day, would you tell us how it passed in
Yes,
the
thank
last
you.
committee?
Um, so when you get a really dirty bill that obviously all the constituents are gonna hate, the farmers are gonna hate it because they're the ones who are most exposed to these chemicals, and if they get cancer, they want the ability to sue. And the people means we're gonna be eating and drinking more of these, pesticides and toxic products. So nobody likes it, really. So how do, members of Congress manage to push it forward? Well, they did 2 sneaky things. The first sneaky thing they did was to, pretend that the purpose of this bill was different than what it really was. So they said it's not a pesticide liability shield. No, 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 that has nothing to do with it. It's just telling the states that they don't have the right to regulate this. Like California, as you know, has very strict carcinogen rules for products which have to be labeled special because California has what 38 million people, I think. So they have one of the top 10 economies in the world. California has its own, basically, EPA that decides on the safety of products. So, what the congressman was saying, well, we just don't want every state to be like California and make their own rules. We want simply a federal rule to supersede the state rules. Now, that's not what the bill was about. That's one part of it, if you depending on how you interpret it. That was not the main reason for the bill. And yet, the head of the subcommittee berated his fellows in the legislature and berated the Maha moms. Maha moms who were making calls were mentioned twice as they discussed this bill. So they got a lot of calls. And I was told by people over the weekend before the vote that they'd call, and people at the other end of the line would deny that the bill had anything to do with pesticide liability shield. So that was number one. So the congressman had probably worked with Bayer, and figured out how to claim, because the bill is written in such a way that it's not clear really what it does. You have to understand the whole background. So some of the Congress members may have really been in the dark. They just didn't know. But others did know, and they confabulated. Okay, so that was number one. Number two, nobody wanted their name on this bill. Nobody wanted to be able to be identified as someone who voted for it. So in the vote, they had a voice vote. And to me, it sounded like the ayes and the nays were about equal. But the chairman of the committee said, "Oh, the nays have it," which means that they weren't going to take this rider out of the bill. And what normally happens at that point is a Democrat pops up and says roll call vote, which means everybody has to say what their vote is, and it's recorded so that you actually have a number, how many are for, how many are against, and what party were they, etc. Well, nobody, not a Democrat, not a Republican, asked for a roll call vote. So nobody knows how that committee of 63 people actually voted for this pesticide liability shield. And so what that means is not only were the Republicans crooked, but the Democrats were colluding with them and had agreed not to put their feet to the fire about this bill, because the Democrats, number one, they may have been paid off also. And number two, they're planning to use this against their Republican opponents, but they're going to use it as a general bad Republicans, look what they did, and not use it individually against the members. So that's
Hmm.
very interesting. It gives you more of a sense that we have a uni party rather than
Yes.
two parties that really fight against each other. We have more of a charade in Congress where everybody agrees ahead of time what's going to happen.
Yes. I don't know much about listening to committee meetings and hearing votes, and I don't know how they usually did things. So when I was watching it, I was hearing everyone pretty much after every vote that they
They
made,
asked
they
for a
had a
roll
roll
call
call. I mean, every single one. That was a 3 or 4 hour
meeting.
what do you call it, meeting. And every single one except this one. So that was a shock to me to realize that, in
Yeah,
real time.
right. It meant this was
Um,
a very important bill rider,
yeah.
and everybody knew what their role was ahead of time. And the leadership, probably could have even threatened the members. Don't you dare call for a roll call.
Mhm. Vaccine liability shields are awful. We can't sue the vaccine manufacturers for anything. And it causes the manufacturers to have no incentives to create a safer product. Pesticide liability shields will do the same thing. There is no incentive to create a safe product. On top of that, pesticides, I think, are more dangerous in a way because you cannot see it. You cannot, there's no like feeling it. It's in the air. And I have seen this firsthand in my family. My daughter, a couple years ago, had a reaction to some spray for yellow jackets. I didn't know it at the time, but within 12 hours, her whole body was inflamed. She was spiking 102 fevers.
Wow.
I was told, "Well, this is a viral infection." I said, "But she's not like there's a buildup to sickness. This is not it." And I had
Yeah.
this gut feeling it was not right. It continued on for months. We spent thousands of dollars trying to find alternative health care for her. And eventually we were on the right path with our alternative doctor. And within 6 months, she was pretty much back to herself. She was, I think, 4 at the time. The next summer, I paid again for that Yellow Jacket company to come out and take care of another spot. The same thing happened, and that's when I put the pieces together. I called the company. I said, "What is in this spray?" And I got the package, and I started looking up, the chemicals in there, and sure enough, they were I mean, it says on the internet, "These are very toxic chemicals, blah, 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 blah." And I just realized there's definitely a correlation here. She had spiking fevers for the next couple days. Her whole face was inflamed, but because it was a lesser amount and I kept her indoors because I knew that this was probably it, she got over it very quickly, and plus all the alternative health things helped.
Yes.
But the people don't know, and then it will be blamed these pesticide reactions will be blamed on something else. You will be sent down the rabbit hole trying to find the answer to a very honestly simple problem.
Yes.
Um, so,
I'm in the same boat as you. Once upon a time, when my children were young, I allowed a pesticide company to spray chlorpyrifos inside the walls of my house. Um, because I looked it up and I could not find, worrying toxicity data. And I was assured by the company that this stuff was perfectly safe. And of course, it's been banned in a lot of places. It's terrible stuff. And, I, as a doctor, had, of course, this is like, I don't know, 30 something years ago.
mhm.
There was not much, there was no internet then. How did you find information? You tried, and I couldn't find it. So I allowed them
Yes.
to use it, and it was a big mistake. Um,
What
we're
health
constantly
effects
being
did you
sprayed.
see?
Our towns spray for mosquitoes. My next door neighbor sprays their lawn and it blows onto my site. And if so, some people are super sensitive, like your daughter, but
Mhm.
for others, it's just often cumulative toxicity because if it's a forever chemical, it stays in your body. It stays on your lawn. So what happened with if we can move to sewer sludge for a moment, is that farms that 30 years ago had so everything that goes down the drain of your house and companies, so they can pour whatever they want, whatever they're using, whatever byproducts of their processes they have. If it goes down a drain, they can pour it down a drain, and it all gets mixed together and goes to a sewage treatment plant, which does minimal treatment, basically has takes the separates the liquids from the solids and puts the liquids back into the ocean or the river and takes the solids and s- uh, turns it into renames it as biosolids. So it's sewage sludge and then it becomes dried and becomes biosolids. And EPA encouraged farmers to spray this or on their farms, and it was pelletized to be put onto gardens and sold in garden stores. So if you go to Home Depot or anywhere else and buy fertilizer or other soil amendments, the chances are very good that they will contain sewage sludge, including PFAS, these forever chemicals that are endocrine disruptors, probable carcinogens, etc. And how do I know this? Well, a couple of years ago, the Sierra Club went and bought 9 bags of fertilizer from 9 different garden stores, including Home Depot, 9 brands, and 8 of them had toxic levels of PFAS in them. I also spoke to the person in charge of in charge of sewer sludge in my town. And he told me that because a number of Maine farms had been condemned because of so much PFAS in the farm, they could no longer farm because they had laid down this sewage sludge, that Maine no longer allows it. So instead, it gets shipped to Canada. And then in Canada, which has no regulations, they bag it and turn it into fertilizer and sell it back to the United States. And it's usually not labeled. Occasionally, it's labeled as biosolids, but usually it's not labeled at all. So you won't be able to know. So you have to be really I will not buy bags of anything from the farm store any longer. I will only buy manure from local farmers, if I know what they're doing because, um, my I wanna grow fruits and vegetables in my house, and I don't wanna be poisoning myself after going through
Right.
all that to try to have a clean product. I don't wanna poison myself with PFAS and everything else that might be in that sewage sludge. So,
Yeah, like
you know
PFAS tomatoes.
exactly.
Ugh,
Yeah.
yeah.
And you're poisoning your land forever.
Mm. So remind me again, what does Section 507 do?
Okay, so I guess the chemical industry must have been talking they must have been talking to each other, and they knew that we knew that Bayer was going to come up with some kind of rider or bill to, get rid of its liability for glyphosate, and it also managed to get 100 other or more than 100 other pesticide companies to go along and form, a group to lobby for this, and they've been threatening farmers that, the feds are gonna take away your glyphosate and you won't be able to farm anymore. You know, where and, Secretary Kennedy has told me, "We are not taking away anyone's pesticides. If they want to use this stuff, that's fine. We just want it labeled, correctly."
Yes.
But they've tried to scare farm states, members of Congress from farming communities. That's what these people are trying to do. These MAHA people wanna ban your pesticides and your fertilizers, etcetera. So, um, anyway, so because Section 453, which was the pesticide liability shield, got stuck into this bill at the last minute, well, so did Section 507. And 507 said, "Look." Well, this is not what it said. See, neither one of them, if you read them on the surface and you don't know the backstory, you won't know what they're about.
Yeah.
But here's what 507 is about. In January, right before leaving office, the Biden EPA issued a draft report on sewage sludge and PFAS, forever chemicals in sewage sludge. And EPA has been denying that this was a problem for over 30 years. But in this draft report, they finally admitted it. They said, it can harm your liver, it can harm your kidneys, it can harm the endocrine system, the immune system, and it's a probable carcinogen. Well, the multi-billion-dollar sewage sludge industry didn't want that report to come out because if that report got finalized, that would require regulation by EPA to stop this, program of spreading the stuff on farmland. 56% of sewage sludge gets spread on farmland right now. Um,
Mm.
so it's a big and we don't know how many farms have had it. The New York Times said 20% of farmland has taken out permits to use it, so maybe 20%. Farmers, in many cases don't wanna test because if they find that it's there, and it might have been put on 30 years ago before they bought the farm, if it's there, they may lose their farm. There's no money anywhere yet to compensate them for this disaster, so people don't wanna
Mm.
test, so the milk you're drinking, the food you're eating may have been grown on soil contaminated with this, and your food may be
Mhm.
contaminated with it. Anyway, so what Section 507 did is because this is an appropriations bill, this is a sneaky way to do things, it said, "No federal funds can be used to implement or study or do anything with this report that was issued in January, this draft report." Basically, it said, "We have to bury this report. No federal agency can do anything with it." So we're just gonna hide the fact that the report says it's an endocrine disruptor, it's a probable carcinogen, blah, blah, blah. And therefore we can continue putting sludge on farmland. Now, what my organization, Door to Freedom, wants to do is to completely stop at a federal level the spreading of sludge on farmland because why do we want these chemicals in our food? It's not only our food, because when you put it on land and it's not in a landfill where it's controlled, it winds up in the water supply, right? There's runoff. And so it's in our
Right.
food and our water. And the EPA's mission is to protect the water and to protect the air from these chemicals, not encourage
Right.
that they contaminate it more. So we just want EPA to do its job, issue this report.
Yes.
And so this also Section 507 was also voted in by the Republicans to stay in the bill and deep six, destroy this report. But they did have a roll call vote, so we know the vote was 31 to 28
Hmm.
for the sewage sludge rider. We don't know what the vote was for the other pesticide bill.
regenerative farmers like Joel Salatin, has he conducted tests on his land to test the PFAS levels?
That I have no idea. In Maine, the state no longer allows it in Maine, that it can't be spread on farms
Oh.
in Maine, and Connecticut has done the same thing. And in Texas, actually, USDA Secretary Brooke Rollins' mother, Helen Kerwin, is now a member of the Texas legislature, and it is her primary issue because in her county, cattle died from this. And yeah,
Oh,
cattle and
wow.
people have died from the spread of sludge when it contained high levels of PFAS or other toxic materials. It also sometimes contains very harmful bacteria, and people have died of bacterial infections where it's been spread and transmitted through the air. Anyway, so
And let me
it's a
ask,
problem in Texas.
are the
Go ahead.
people who are dying and having such strong reactions to it, are those the farm workers or are those people eating the produce or the meat?
So, it's very hard to prove who died from it because each batch of sludge contains different chemicals in different amounts.
Mhm.
But, sometimes you could prove it because there were bacteria in it, and you could show that the sludge contained the bacteria, and somebody dies of pneumonia due to that bacteria, and they lived next door to where it was put down. So there are other places where the cattle, grazed on hay that was grown in areas where the sludge was put down, and they died of PFAS poisoning, and then you measure the soil, and you find there's high levels of PFAS, and so you could make that, um, analogy. In Maine, there was a famous, organic dairy, and they bought hay, because you don't wanna feed if I the pristine way to grow cows in a cold state is they graze for half the year, and then you feed them hay for half the year. Well, they had bought hay from out of state, and the hay was contaminated with PFAS, and their cows started dying, and somebody suggested they test the milk for PFAS, and they found very high levels, and they found it in the hay. They had to get rid of all their cows, and start
Huh.
again. Luckily, their land was not contaminated.
So is this a big are many farmers dealing with this right now? Are they aware of this?
So many farmers don't want to be aware of it. I mean, they're aware, but they don't want to test because there's no federal program or state program to compensate them for their loss.
Mm,
So if they
mm,
test and they find their land's contaminated, then the state will come in and say you can't grow anything here. Get rid of your dairy cows. Then they're bankrupt.
mhm,
Um, so some people are attempting to develop some method of compensation that will incentivize testing for this, but right now
mm,
that's not happening. Some farmers are testing, and a bunch of them have gone out of business in Maine. The state of Maine has made the testing free and has tested, I don't know, at least 100 farms. And there are areas where it's found that there's more PFAS than in some places than in other places.
mhm,
Um, it's a huge so we don't know of the food you eat, you don't know what the contamination levels are. And it's such a can of worms because it might be 20% of the farmlands are contaminated, um, that it's too expensive to deal with. So nobody wants to deal with it,
right.
except at the state level. And, but the easy thing to do is just to stop spreading it. What Because
Yes,
it's cumulative. So, it doesn't go away because of these fluorine bonds that are very, very strong, and we don't have anything in the environment that will break them down. And sometimes when you treat the PFAS, you actually get a more toxic molecule forming. Yeah, it's a big mess, a lot of problems, but the simple thing to do right now is just stop spreading it, put it in a lined landfill and leave it there. Don't
hmm,
let it get into the water and the food. And then over the long term, what we need to do is separate the waste streams from houses, which is not we've got our personal care products and our drugs, but it's not terribly toxic. and
Mhm.
industrial waste. Industrial waste
Mhm.
will need to be treated separately. And then the
Mhm.
human waste, that probably could be spread on land if it makes sense. But why are we mixing them together and pretending that it's all good?
So we've got section 507 and section 543 or
453.
453,
Yeah.
453 that are in the House Appropriations Bill, and these are harmful sections for people and for animals and for the air that we all breathe. Where do they stand now, having passed out of a House committee? Where will they go once everyone reconvenes in September? How close are we actually to having these become law?
Okay. Um, so both of these riders are now in the appropriations bill for the interior and the environment, and they will. And on appropriations bills are generally must-pass bills. They fund the EPA, for instance, so you have to fund the EPA every year. They will go to the full House after it reconvenes. So the whole House of Representatives is on vacation until September 2nd. Which means they are home in their home regions, and you can make appointments with them and you can call them at their offices and say, "This is not acceptable. You absolutely need to vote against this. You need to get it pulled out of the bill." Now, the Senate hasn't done anything with it yet. So it could be stopped at the Senate, it could be stopped at the full House. And the leadership of the House and Senate, when they create a final bill that will need to be passed by both houses, they could pull these things out. They have they have the power to do that. They can just say, "Look, it's not popular. It's causing us too much trouble. Get rid of it." And as I said, we don't know how much of an incentive Bayer and the rest of the industry has given these members of Congress, and so we don't know what they stand to lose if they don't push these 2 riders through, and that's a
Hmm.
problem. I've been told Trump hates these bills. Um, I believe that's true because this is really, it's driving a stake into the heart of MAHA. On
Yes.
the one hand, you ran a campaign with Mr. Kennedy saying that you wanted to make Americans healthy again, and now you've got these 2 riders that are trying to poison Americans with even more toxic chemicals, and it makes no sense. It's not there's nothing good for American people in these 2 riders, so why would you do it only if you're receiving some massive type of bribe? Um, and so the Republicans, need to get their act together and figure out whether the bribe is more important or whether how they do in the midterms, whether destroying the Maha movement is more important to them than the bribe or whatever it is they're getting.
Yes.
Let's go back a moment. So in 1986, Congress passed, for the first time ever, a liability shield for consumer product, and that was childhood vaccines. As long as CDC put a vaccine on the childhood schedule and recommended it for all children, that vaccine would you could no longer sue the manufacturer of that vaccine if your child was ill. And instead, because Constitution requires that you have a remedy, Congress created a different remedy where they put an excise tax on every dose of vaccine. It went into one pot, and you could come to the government. They set up a special master's program. So if you thought your child had a vaccine injury or died from a vaccination, you could bring your paperwork. You could even take a lawyer, and you couldn't go to a real court, but you could go to a special master and ask for monetary benefits. And some years, almost nobody got the benefits, but lately, for whatever political reason, they're giving about 50% of the people who apply benefits, which is quite unusual. And over $5
Hmm.
billion has been paid out in this program since the late 80s. However, this pesticide liability shield does not provide for any other mechanism for people who have been injured by pesticides to get some sort of financial benefit. And so I would suggests that it's unconstitutional as well as a dirty bill or two dirty bills.
Absolutely. Um, I've thought a lot about what this will mean to our president and to the whole Maha movement if this were passed. And I think it would destroy Republicans, that they will actually be destroying themselves if this is
Exactly.
passed, because so many people are fed up with the uniparty look and with being literally poisoned by their government. I think COVID opened the eyes of so many people, and I think they're done. So Republicans will lose uh, the backing of all of Maha, which is how they won the
Yes,
presidential election.
exactly.
So they might want to really think hard. Um, I think of my little girl's blown up face, just months of inflammation, and I always questioned people when they said, "I think these pesticides are harmful," and I had said, "Well, prove it." I don't see it. I've never had a reaction. How do you know that it's really the pesticides? I used to be that person. And then I saw it firsthand, and especially that second year, and there was just absolutely no question, and I see how masked the reactions can be.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. Absolutely, and, there is a theory, I don't know if it's true, but, a lot of alternative doctors use it, which is toxic load, that your body can handle a lot of these toxins for a period of time, and then you overwhelm the systems
Yep.
that can detoxify them, and you're stuck and you become ill, and there
Mhm.
may be no way to make you better. But certainly trying to detox, trying to eat really clean food, drink really clean water, and how do you do that when there's this barrage that you cannot control? I mean, I have 2, charcoal filters on my water supply, and yet now I'm thinking that's not enough, and I have to do something more than that, because I don't like the idea that this stuff is being put into the river, and then that's where my water is coming from, and they're only testing the sludge for nitrogen, phosphorus, and 9 heavy metals. Their EPA does not require, um, communities or companies to test for PFAS or anything else, any other toxins. Just 9 heavy metals, and then the nitrogen and the phosphorus are considered the fertilizer.
Hmm.
So, it's don't it's we're living in a situation where the government, the system has encouraged people not to know, not to look, not to think about it,
That's right.
and, you know, I I think all of us who have seen the effects of toxicants on people, as I mean, you didn't think to take a stick and just get rid of the yellow jackets, you could have done
No.
that,
Well,
right?
I
You
mean, they're
called the
harmful to me,
chemical.
like, yeah, the yellow jackets, if I get stung by them, stung if it stings anyone, that's days of pain and it was by my front door. I didn't want them coming inside, so I didn't even think, "Oh, I'll just have my husband, get a stick out and do it because I don't want him stung." So I
Right.
thought, "Oh, the company, and they have got these great chemicals that just target those little bees." No. It was they don't target the bees, it's everything around it.
Ugh.
So I
Exactly.
you learn.
You
Um,
learn.
c can Kennedy and Lee Zeldin, head of the EPA, do anything about this?
This is a congressional issue. This is a bill. So, no, we have separation of powers. They are in the executive branch, and this is in the legislative branch. Um, what they can do, though, Lee Zeldin is responsible for rolling out regulations as to how bills will be, regulated. So Congress says, "We want you to do X," and Lee Zeldin's agency has to say, "Okay, the way we're gonna do X is by Y and Z."
Hmm.
And so he does have power, but so far, I mean, the fact that he's suing to continue to use fluoride in water supplies, I mean, it's not looking good. This is a man who had a reputation for fighting against PFAS when he was in Congress, and now he seems to be on the other side. So
So
we
why
don't
is
know.
that? Why the switch?
Yes, good question. We don't know. Why the switch? What, who's he working for? Does he want a good job with a chemical company after this? Um, Kennedy, was involved with the first case. So, Dwayne Johnson, a groundskeeper at a school who used a great deal of glyphosate, got initially an over $200 million settlement for his case of Hodgkin's lymphoma. And subsequently, that has been reduced in 2 other legal matters to $21 million. But because Kennedy was, one of the team that fought for Dwayne Johnson, he cannot do anything, um, to manage this problem. And so there it is. I mean,
Hmm.
he knows this is a very important MAHA issue. Everybody who looks at it knows this is a hugely important MAHA issue and could sink the Trump presidency. If he doesn't have a majority in the House and Senate after the midterms, he will get nothing done.
Yep.
So it's a real potential disaster, and everybody needs to be aware of it. And the Republicans are not going to be able to hide behind their skirts and pretend they don't know what these bills are about. These
No,
these are very serious bills. They harm Americans, and Congress has to, put their big girl pants on and admit it. If you're going to vote for these bills, you are going to get into trouble with your constituents, and that's it.
that's
And
right.
don't tell your constituents they've been misinformed by people like me, which is exactly what Simpson, the Representative Simpson, a dentist, had the gall to tell the members of Congress. He said these Maha moms have been misinformed about this bill. No, they haven't. He's the liar, and we have to remember that they lie to us, uh, and we must not put up with it. Um,
Yeah. Well, besides banging on congressmen's doors and calling them as they are in on recess and once they come back to Washington in September, what else can American citizens do to combat the corruption that we're seeing here?
um, Well, I thought you were gonna ask a different question, and I was gonna say you might wanna start growing your own fruits and vegetables if especially if your family's owned the land for a long time and you know that no toxics have been poured on it, as I'm doing. I live in a residential area, but I have almost an acre. My house is 81 years old, and so I know that none of this was poured on it. That's a long time since it's been farmland. Um so I'm growing my own food. Now, what else can you do? I think labeling is important. So Kennedy is in charge of the FDA, and they are responsible for most food labels. Now, USDA is responsible for some, but I think demanding, and they're working on this. So we're demanding that the labels in food actually tell us what's been used, and FDA has the right. It hasn't been doing this, but it has the right to measure pesticide levels. It is supposed to sign off on residual pesticide and other toxic products in food. So, were FDA to choose to do so, they could start measuring how much of this stuff is in our foods and reject those that have high levels. And that would be huge, because what farmer is gonna use this stuff if their food is gonna be rejected by the FDA? So the FDA does fruits, vegetables, eggs. USDA does meats. Meats are a problem. Right now, you don't even know what country the meat came from, because there was a World Trade Organization case, and the United States was not allowed to label meat properly. So it can say made in the USA when it isn't, when it came from somewhere else, and it just got wrapped in the USA at the moment. Next year, there will be voluntary labeling of country of origin on meat. So if somebody wants to say made in USA, um, it probably will be accurate next year in 2026. But if it doesn't have any labeling on it, then the chances are good that it came from somewhere else. And that's important because now we are importing beef. So the United States has become a net importer of beef. The number of cows being raised in the United States is at the lowest level since 1951. And that's because of monopolization within the industry, and farmers and ranchers have been screwed. In 1970, a rancher, when you paid a certain amount for meat at the grocery store, 70% of that money went to the rancher. Today in 2025, 30% of that money goes to the rancher, and the rest goes to the grocery, the processors, etc. And so ranchers are just going out of business right and left. We've lost 8,000, 8, sorry, how many was it? 8%. 142,000 farms and ranches were lost in a 5-year period between 2017 and 2022, which is when USDA collects the data every 5 years. So 8% of farms went bankrupt in a 5-year
Who
period in the
who
United States.
determines how much money the rancher is getting versus the grocer?
So what happens is there has been monopolization of the meat processing industry. In part because of federal regulations that caused most of the small processes to shut down because it became too expensive for them to upgrade to what the feds wanted. 4 companies, and 2 of them are not American owned. 4 companies control 85% of the beef processing in the United States. And so they decide how much the rancher gets paid. The rancher will bring their cattle to a beef processor, and it's take it or leave it, because there may not be another beef processor for hundreds of miles, and they're all colluding anyway, and they've all decided how much they're going to pay. And they're going to pay this guy as little as they can get away with, because really they want to buy his land and they want to grow the cattle themselves. They want a completely vertically and horizontally integrated uh, business model for food. And although we have laws called antitrust laws that could have been used by the DOJ and the Federal Trade Commission to stop this consolidation and monopolization, the federal government has not used these powers and has allowed the monopolies to get bigger and bigger. The biggest one is a Brazilian company called JBS, which has been found guilty of bribing politicians, especially in Brazil. So there was a small company in Brazil. They started bribing politicians to allow them to acquire all these other companies, and then they came to the United States, and now they're the biggest meat processor in the United States, JBS. They have many different brands. They've taken over all these other companies. And so you can pick what brand of meat product you want, but it's probably all JBS or one of these other 3 companies. One is owned mostly by China. 26% of ground beef in the United States is imported.
Hmm.
And so these are real problems. And so far, the government hasn't done anything to fix them, has made the problems worse. And our organization, Door to Freedom, is rolling out a campaign next month to try to educate Americans about what's going on, why it's going on. And we believe it's because basically certain elites, certain very wealthy people in the world want to control food. They want to centralize control of food. They want to tell us what we can eat and what we can't eat. And, if you can control the food, you control the people. So they
That's
are
right.
very happy for farmers to go out of business and for Bill Gates to keep buying farmland. And he doesn't have to grow anything. He thinks he's going to make his money off carbon credits. Anyway, there are so many scams, but
Yep.
people need to be aware of this and support your local farmer, buy locally.
Mhm.
We're also the federal government through USDA does not allow a local farmer to butcher a cow or lamb and sell it directly to consumers. That's against the law throughout the United States. And he can take those animals to a custom slaughterhouse, a small local slaughterhouse, and they can butcher it for him, and he's not allowed to sell. He can give away the meat, but he can't sell it. Now, in some states, you can do a farm share, and a group of people can own a cow or a herd of cows. and then they can get the meat in certain states, but not all. Most you
Hmm.
can't. But what we want to see is direct sales from a farmer or custom slaughterhouse to a consumer without any federal intervention, without a USDA inspector. Because what happened is USDA said no meat can be sold unless there is a USDA inspector on site, or a state has a facility that is at least as stringently regulated as a USDA facility. And if you don't have that, you can't sell meat. You can sell vegetables. They haven't gone into vegetables. Vegetables are FDA. Meat is USDA. And so the farmer can sell you all the vegetables and fruit that you want, but he can't sell you meat. And meat is where the money is, right? You can go to a
Yeah.
grocery store and pay $20 a pound for a nice piece of meat or more. I just paid for like an organically grown piece of meat, $30 a pound when I had company the other day. And I'm like, whoa.
Yeah.
Um, well, if the farmer could get that $30 himself, they don't have to go bankrupt anymore, right? They're not gonna get
No.
30 cents on the dollar, they could get the whole dollar pretty much,
Mhm.
and that would save them, and it would make the consumer happy because they could get fresh meat. They don't, they when they buy it in the grocery store, they don't know where it comes from. They don't know
Yep.
how long it's been there, they don't know what it's been sprayed with, but they can get it fresh from the farmer. So, it's a win-win again for the people, and that's
Yes.
what we're gonna be working on.
It seems like gross government overreach to tell the farmer that they cannot sell directly to consumers. It just that is government overreach. It's also interesting that if we were just following the laws of the country, like antitrust laws, if we just followed the laws and enforced them, we wouldn't be here.
Right,
The same goes for
right.
what's going on with the religious exemption process with the military. I hear my last podcast last week was with Casey Dixon, who met with senior military officials in the Pentagon saying, just follow the law. If you had followed the law, we wouldn't have to be here. And just going forward, follow the law. And one of the military officials actually looked at her and said, well, what if we get 100,000 people putting in religious exemptions for vaccines? And she said, so what?
Yeah,
It's a
if
law.
you don't like it, change the law.
Right? Right. Oh my goodness. Well, okay, so follow the law, or encourage the DOJ to follow the law, enforce the law, grow your own vegetables, educate yourself as what are the laws,
Educate your
what is
neighbors, educate your
educate your
friends.
neighbors.
I mean, we're in a
Yes.
food crisis now,
Yeah.
and, farms, we're losing, 63, I think, farms a day are going under in the United States, and
Oh,
so this consolidation of food, and particularly meat, is rampant, and if we're to stop it, we have to buy locally, but we have to tell everybody about it, we have to change the laws, we have to, stop USDA regulating in such a way that it's causing farmers to go bankrupt right and
yeah.
left. So that's where we are.
Well, Meryl, where can people find you and join your efforts?
Thank you. So I'm the president of an organization called Door to Freedom, doortofreedom.org. That's our website. And we have a lot of information about these agriculture issues on the website now. But we are also going to roll out a big campaign next month. And we are building a new website called Save Our Farms and Food. We're using the acronym SOFAF.org. Save Our Farms and Food, SOFAF. It's not up yet. So go to doortofreedom.org, but in mid-September, you will find this website, and we will be doing lots and lots of things at the federal, state, local level to try to turn this farming crisis around and get you healthier
Yep.
food.
Yeah. Excellent. And you have a wonderful
Substack too.
Substack. Yep,
Thank
that
you.
people absolutely you've been following to stay up to date with all things Maha. Well, Meryl, thank you so much for joining me today. I can't wait to see you again when you're next in DC. And thank you for all the work that you're doing. It really is incredible.
Thanks. I'm actually going to be there on Tuesday next week at the Heritage Foundation is hosting a regenerative agriculture um, event in the
Yes.
morning. And so you can watch it. People can watch it
Okay.
as a webinar. You sign up, or you can, if you're in DC, you can go in person, and I'll be there in person watching and talking to the panelists.
Perfect. Well, maybe I'll see you there then. Thanks so much for tuning in. Please like, comment, subscribe to, and share our podcasts. I'll see you next week.